I am Alessandra, and today we'll explore this topic, strategic integration design with DDD, with two great guests and one exceptional moderator. So let me welcome Filip Kostura, Karol Skrzmowski, and Alberto Brandolini. Hi.
Hello.
So thanks for joining us. And before we get started, just quick information. This is a live stream, so people who are watching this video, this stream, can interact with us and share questions and comment in the chat on YouTube and LinkedIn. So now we are ready to start. I'll pass it to Alberto. Enjoy.
Good evening, everybody. Good day if you are in a different hemisphere, and thank you for joining. I have the pleasure of, talking with Karol and Filip. I met them, a few years ago. I don't know how many, just 2 years ago, and a little bit more with Filip, 6, 7. Okay, so you're counting. And... And yes, and I would like to. It was all about domain-driven design, but I would like to start. How did you decide to do something together? How did you start to work on this new set of initiatives?
Shall I start with our story, Karol?
Go ahead.
So, in the year 2024. I visited DDD Europe, and then suddenly a beardy guy started talking to me in Polish. As you might see, I have a Polish name, but I'm German, so I don't speak Polish. And I directly countered, sorry, yeah, I have a Polish name, but I'm not Polish. Let's switch to English. And then we started discussing, got to know each other. And then suddenly we had the idea, there must be something. If you take a look at domain-driven design and the borders of a system where you integrate systems, there must be something. And there we started exploring. And then we had, I think, 1 or 2 Google Meets. We had a Slack channel where we started exchanging. And then we had the curious idea to have a workshop at DDD Europe about strategic integration design, and also had some good experiences here, and suddenly things started kicking off, right? Karol, something
that pretty much sums it up, other than I was basically chasing you for you to explain to me domain-driven design, because I'm not exactly a domain-driven design practitioner. I'm an integration architect by executed profession. So I'm not really designing domain systems, so to speak. I'm always designing interoperability. So I never got the chance to build a system. So that means I never got the chance to actually utilize domain-driven design for that purpose. But I was having a hunch since my early architecture days that there is something on the matter, for which I bought the Eric Evans book back in the day. By the way, fun fact, in the Polish edition, it's not the blue book. It's a black-red book, the original Eric Evans book. I bought it, read it, forgot about it, and then I figured, I'm going to go to Amsterdam to Domain-Driven Design Europe in 24. And I met this guy and started bugging him after the conference. Hey, let's chat about DD, let's chat about integration. And we started exchanging knowledge. Filip started learning about integration architecture from me. I started learning about domain-driven design. And then we started sparring on various aspects and the things that we're actually missing in domain-driven design that would describe integration, or the other way around, what else we can add to integration architecture from domain-driven design. And it turns out there is a large synergy and cohesion over these two. From an architectural discipline and then design discipline, they actually come together very nicely.
So that's actually pretty interesting, because in a way, I was trying to realize that one cannot live without the other. I mean, you cannot do really domain-driven design in the large without solid architectural foundation and a strategy for the boundaries. But then I was thinking you can have these also without domain-driven design. You're just missing the value of the segregation. So you have the machinery and the infrastructure in place with the criteria of robustness, but maybe feeling that okay, something is not completely okay in here. And so I have a small question first and a longer one. A small question is about why the name, why the strategic integration design? I mean, there's quite a few pointers in this, but why did you choose this name for this area?
It's the fact of the matter is that usually people, developers, software engineers, architects, they focus on a system level. Integration architecture is a ecosystem matter. It's always broader. So if you look at architecture as a spectrum of decisions between design and architecture, where on the side of architecture you have significant cost, significant time and effort, and decisions that are long-lasting, then basically that's on the side of strategic thinking, long-term thinking. So integration architecture at large scale, that's always going to be strategic rather than tactical.
Exactly, because you need to view it from the end-to-end process, from the end-to-end business behavior. And since my career started more or less with in the ZOA times, where the ARIS modeling in the SAP world was in, where you had the event process chain, and there we have always taken a look at the end-to-end process. And so when I got to know then in 2018, 2020, event storming, and made click for me, where I said, okay, model the end-to-end process, understand the whole story first before you can decide where lives what in which system, and then you need to integrate the systems, because sometimes you have your customer portal is custom built, but your CRM system is from one vendor, your invoicing is from another vendor, your document management is something open source you have, and then in the middle you have an ESB, a broker, or even worse, everything is connected point to point, and then the mess starts and no one knows where stuff is happening, and then you fix quickly things in the integration points, or even worse, in the integration platform. And exactly to remedy these issues, we want to help colleagues to not run into these traps and bury themselves in technical debt.
You're actually, oh, please.
And to the matter of fact, the biggest problem is that people tend to look at the integration efforts as one-off per project, where it doesn't have to be this way. It can be fit for purpose with all sorts of additional qualities like reusability, composability, which is, again, something we also want to teach, that if we're looking at integration efforts, they're not one-off. That this is a living thing that can be still extended and developed further, adding value to it rather than just build it and forget about it.
And to add to this, what's important for me is we connect meaning if we integrate. So that means we have one system on the one side and the other system, and somewhere they need to share semantics. They need to understand each other, and their ubiquitous language is so powerful that you make sure that the two integrating parties understand each other, and that you find the common denominators, so that you can make the APIs fit. Because if you understand each other's concept, you understand where you need to map the data model, where you need to map the behavior. So that, because sometimes you have a well-structured address object, and sometimes you have just address field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's hard to decide, okay, where do I map the street? What is the number? What is the zip code? And all of these things are not really easy mappable, and therefore you need to understand the meaning. And we have there, I think, also a nice block where we say, hey, we do not just connect systems, we connect meaning.
You actually tickled, well, thank you for this one. You tickled some memories from the past. Like I was when I was playing with context maps, when I was assisting Eric in some train very, very long ago. So one of the things that was clicking with me was, when you look in a context map, you're actually taking a look at the white space between the different bounded contexts. And I was defining this white space like a no man's land. Like you fix your problem inside your bubble, but if you start looking at the space between the bubble, this is where the long-lasting problem are, because in many places it was also lack of responsibility or accountability, or who actually owns this one. Oh, we connected, and then who needs to maintain it? And so that's exactly a map into potentially a minefield. And I guess you were part of this territory. And just
we charted this territory. We start charting this territory, and at Como Camp this year, I had a discussion with a colleague and said, we are charting the territory between bounded contexts, and the statement was, "There's nothing." I said, "En contraire, mon cher," and it is. There is a lot. You have the relations. You have the messaging or the communication patterns. You have the responsibility. You have the ownership. You have the. So it's a lot of topics that you need to consider. And looking at Vlad Kononov with coupling and distance, the tighter you're coupled and the longer the distance, the bigger the problems. So, but Carol, that's your forte with coupling and.
Yeah, I had my share of conversations with Vlad on the topic of coupling, and especially on the system distance. And that's a goldmine of conversations, especially that for some reason the world is set on the word decoupled. And if two systems communicate, there's no such thing as decoupled. It doesn't exist. If you put a message broker in between two systems, they're not decoupled. They're still very much coupled. You just increase the distance between them. At least this is what Vlad would say, answering that. But there is much more to it on the space between bounded contexts. One thing that Eric Evans never defined but mentioned briefly is an interchange context. And this is exactly what we're defining. It's not part of the course per se. Maybe we'll add a module 5 in some time. But we are right now in the middle of rearranging the vocabulary of context mapping to match for ecosystem level. And I actually had a conversation with Eric Evans last Friday, and we're continuing the conversation this Friday, where Eric is validating the new vocabulary for context mapping, which includes interchange context and several types of set interchange context. So there's much more between those bounded contexts than people may think. And it's an unknown territory. It's a niche aspect of architecture called integration architecture. And I'm not even joking when I say that half of the architects that I speak to, they don't even know who an integration architect is and what does that person do for a living. So it's a problematic area that is underdeveloped, underrepresented, so to speak.
Well, this is part of the role. Like if you do your job, nobody notices you. But if you make a mess, they suddenly discover the guy that decide that. So you're in one of these job. And okay, True. No, it totally makes sense. And in a way, you will have the patterns to make a reusable solution, but the technical part is only one side. There's a lot of okay, who needs to own the translation? Who needs to know about the other side? And this is what the upstream, downstream relationship comes to mind as a driver. But also the thing that is interesting in this area is you have to make decisions before knowing the real story. So you make an integration with another side, and at this moment you have only the knowledge of there is another team that needs to speak with us, and suddenly this conversation becomes interesting. And what you design for your group of friends now becomes okay. Well, we can just propagate this to every other team in the company and also to the outside, and then you need to be there saying like, wait a minute.
Exactly. Wait a minute, not so fast, because this is what we also teach in the course. Before you can decide on what kind of integration you choose, you need to understand the end-to-end story. You need to understand where you sit in the business process. You need to understand your context. And one of the fallacies we have also researched is that there are some kind of centralized integration teams knowing nothing about the business process, and then just say, hey, plumb system A to system B and system B to system C, and it will work. And exactly this is where we want to go in and say, you have to understand the business process. You have to understand the business model as well. Because if you have a low margin, high frequency business, and you decide for the integration between two high volume systems for a slow ETL batch, might not work. You might have a high frequency messaging in between. And all these things you need to consider to take the right architectural decision. We also have, or that is more or less Carol's invention, a qualitative analysis of the scenario. And then we take a look at the end-to-end process to understand where are the integration points with event storming and domain message flow. And then we have a better understanding where are the integration scenarios and what are the requirements, the technical requirements, the business requirements per integration scenario. Otherwise, you are just blindly integrating and cross your fingers that nothing goes wrong and that you stay invisible. But if you don't do this, the chances are high that sooner or later something might go terribly wrong. Carol, did you forget something? No, I did.
Well, to that note, you said centralized integration team. Just to be fair to centralized integration teams, that is not a bad thing per se. But lack of business knowledge and lack of understanding of the business processes is a very problematic gap for integration developers and integration teams working, especially in large environments. And it differs depending on the maturity of an organization. You might want to have that team centralized or decentralized or domain partitioned or all sorts of other things, which basically means you need to understand how mature your organization is, how mature your team is in terms of knowledge about the organization, about the business processes, etc. Because if it's immature, there is no chance you're going to go distributed or at a high scale. And this is also the aspect of design, that when do we involve an integration architect or integration engineers in the design? For a majority of companies, integration efforts are an afterthought. They build a system, and then after they built it, they were like, oh, we need to integrate. Okay. We're just going to set up an API. That's it. Whereas it's more complex. The bigger the ecosystem we're having, the more design upfront is needed, so that we actually decide what are the interactions between systems within the bounds of the business process, which basically means that we need to gather sufficient knowledge and involve integration specialists as early as possible, which is always an organization problem, not a technical problem. Technically, we're doing a good job. Organization-wise, that differs per organization.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was painting myself the metaphor of you cannot design a subway for a city without knowing what the business area and the residential area is, and without expecting the traffic. You need to know the forces, present and future, so that you can make good infrastructure for that.
Exactly.
Well, you cannot predict the future, but you can make your infrastructure, well, in this case, integration architecture, so that it is extensible to that extent that it can survive any future changes or most of the future changes, which is what Barry would talk about a lot in terms of residues. And as I spoke with Barry multiple times, Barry is, I don't know if you knew that, Barry is a former integration architect. He used to do integration back in the day. And having an integration platform in an organization, that's basically, for Barry, it's a residue. That's what he would say about this. So there's basically, we're looking at something that solves a lot of problems, and there are many attractors to lead to the same problem, which an integration platform will alleviate to a certain extent. Not all problems, but at least some of those in terms of communication can be solved by placing proper middleware.
Yeah, this is where you might confirm or deny, but there is actually a little advantage in working with very large companies, is that change is a little bit slow. I mean, you can predict the future a little bit longer, because the future takes a long time to materialize, and that was my experience with the larger ones.
It really depends on the company, you know. There are some that are very slow, and you're very right about that. But then there are those that are really volatile. To give you an example, I've been working for a company that literally bought off startups and their systems and their products and incorporated them into their ecosystem by just pulling out one system and placing another one because it was better. That volatility, that's a lot of work instantly, and it's difficult. It's not going to be like this. It's impossible. But suddenly you're faced with a lot of work that has a very, very short deadline. So it really depends, and you cannot predict that, because if you're far away from the business stakeholders who make these kind of decisions over acquisitions, that's impossible to predict what's going to come next and which system you're going to have to replace entirely and plug it into your ecosystem through an integration platform. But if you have that integration platform, it's actually a lot easier to do.
Yep.
And on that note, so I like to quote you here in the workshops. If you have an external system, that is where you can put the blame on. And having these external systems is helping also to understand where are the integration points directly from the event storming. And so if you understand it, your solution, or not the solution, your process from the business story, and you see the external points, and you also see, okay, now this bounded context will live in this other system, that gives you an idea where the integration points are. Because if you have a bounded context living in one vendor and the other bounded context actually which should be close together, are living in the next system, so you have at least a hint that there might be some tighter coupling between two bounded contexts living in different systems, which can lead to wanted or unwanted consequences.
That's cool. Next question. So you mentioned that you came from different backgrounds. You were kind of complementary. Sorry for being the Italian doing this. And now I'm curious, what were the most interesting blind spots of the two disciplines?
Ooh. I know on which blind spot for Philip we spent the most time.
But this is let's critique the domain-driven design first. Okay, so that might be the easier one, at least for me. That is the point that we, as a community, in the DDD community, we are thinking in systems, which is not bad, but we are always within the system. We never think it across beyond the domain system. And having this integration aspects in mind helps you also design differently. That you, for example, if you want to expose an API, you make it verbose, understandable, somehow cohesive, that it's and you also think of, hey, is this maybe an anti-corruption layer which is protecting my core business from something from the outside and not just exposing your database model via REST bad behavior, but you know what I mean. And also for me, the learning curve in integration was that the rules there are a bit different than within the system. Very, very, very different in terms of how you take design decisions. Very different in the thinking patterns. And that was for me, especially when it comes to API-led, that was really boggling for me how this kind of architecture style works. And also that you should not use Kafka for integrating or use it for a message-based integration. But that is, Carol, please continue before I dig my grave here.
People know this about me. I'm not a huge Kafka fan. I understand what Kafka is and that it has its use cases. But for me, Kafka is a cargo cult that is basically, I could consider, if Kafka was a pattern, it would be an anti-pattern. So it has its uses, but limited to a specific case. But to that extent, we created a bit of a puzzle for Eric Evans, which we presented to him in 2025. Exactly what Philip was mentioning, understanding API-led architecture and the number of layers there and the abstractions and what they do and why they do that and what are the relationships between those abstractions. This is something at that time we couldn't describe with context mapping. That's why we had to reinvent context mapping vocabulary to a certain extent. And for Philip, that was one of the biggest blind spots, where we spent literally 3 hours on a call consecutively straight to just talk about API-led architecture, to talk about integration platforms, and for me to explain the dynamics between the different abstractions that are happening there. For me personally, and this is where I was like pinging Philip every morning when I was on the bus sitting reading a book, and I was probably reading at that time Domain-Driven Refactoring by Alessandro Cola and Alberto Acerbis. Yeah. Sorry, I'm butchering Italian names.
No worries.
And I was like, fair enough. And I was like, the first half of the book and the first 4 chapters are really a really good introduction to domain-driven design, which I was lacking in terms of a structured introduction. My knowledge about domain-driven design is derived through conversation or various examples. And I was reading that, it was like certain concepts from domain-driven design on a system level were very foreign to me. Again, because I never designed a domain system myself in the 15 years of my career, because my focus is only on interoperability between domain systems. So I was like, okay, I have no idea what you guys are talking here about. What is an aggregate? What is a value object? How do they differ, etc. For me, these are things that are very foreign, because we don't use these kind of things in integration. In integration, I have a data model written in XSD, WSDL, OpenAPI spec, and I have objects in that data model and a tree-like structure, and that's the extent of it. And I don't really have to think about a lot more about that, other than if I do domain partitioning on an integration platform, then I have multiple definitions of the same object, being customer, order, whatever that may be, per a specific business domain. And that's it. In terms of modeling of data, integration is a lot simpler than domain systems. But in terms of modeling of behavior, it is sometimes way more complex than domain systems, because there's a lot more to behavior than the data model itself. So the base terms were really the mind-boggling part.
Beautiful.
But also the discussions we had around event storming and domain message flow, where we also had prepared these courses and the workshops at the especially the first workshop at DDD Europe 25. I think we spent a lot of time discussing, how to read it, how to understand it, what is the event decision command pattern, why does it work that way, etc. So these are things where we really found, there is between these two worlds, there is some kind of misunderstanding. We need to bring them closer together so that we really can make them understand each other. Because if you have, for example, a business analyst, a system architect knowing about domain-driven design, and you can talk in their language as an integration architect and say, hey, what are the events? What are the pivotal events of that bounded context coming out? And where do I need to check for these changes? What are the read models that you are exposing? And all these kind of things make the conversation easier because you have a common vocabulary, a ubiquitous language that you understand. And that makes also life easier. And from the feedback which we got from participants were more or less, oh, now I have something to talk to my system architects about. Now we can take a look at the business process and the business behavior and take a look how the components behave.
Awesome. I'm actually going to the closing question, checking the time, and we probably already overrun. So tough question, short answer, and the question is, how is the last generation of AI LLMs impacting your territory?
Ooh.
Is this? You have 16 seconds to answer.
A lot.
You have a little more, but yeah.
Yeah, a lot. So just a new proverb or pun we are framing. If you want to return to Zoa, put as much integration logic in your MCP as possible, or business logic in your MCP as possible. So it means MCPs are the new integration brokers, in essence. And so be careful what you do here, because it's a mediator, an ACL between your domain system and your agent. So kudos to Michael Plöth about context mapping in the age of AI. Awesome blog series. So also pointing this out, and it's obvious that we have sooner or later a lot to do with cleaning up the integrations between the LLMs and the domain systems, at least from my perspective. And working in my 9-to-5 for SAP, and we are currently building a lot of MCPs for various systems. That will be something, where we need to understand the business better so that agents do not go rogue.
From my perspective, looking at architecture itself, LLMs don't really mess that much up because LLMs are absolutely horrendous at architecture. So that's good for me as an architect. But at the level of using agentic AI, LLMs in various IT ecosystems and setups, that means there is more emphasis on integration architecture and data architecture to clean it up before we start introducing them and connecting them to our domain systems. Because without that, well, yes, either we're going to repeat the lovely mistakes of service-oriented architecture where people put too much logic into the ESBs and all those ESB and SOA projects just completely failed. And there's plenty of examples from 20 years back where that happened. Or we're going to just have lots of lovely hallucinations in the AI agents because their data sources are not domain aligned, which means they will produce a lot of things that are not exactly cohesive.
On that note, I know, Alessandro, we are a bit over time, but the topic of ubiquitous language domain-driven design, integration in ontology will become the next big thing we need to look at. Because a knowledge graph will guide agents where to grab data from which system using MCPs. So this will be something where domain-driven design really can shine on the system level as well as on the ecosystem level.
And then integration architecture can provide proper guardrails for exposing data in a safe, observable, and auditable way to all those agents running there in the wild.
That's pretty cool. Got the message from Alessandra. Thank you everybody who joined and listened. Thank to Carol and Philip. And my last word to Alessandra.
Yes, thanks so much, Carol, Philip, and Alberto, for sharing your knowledge with us. We will see you soon at the workshop, of course, online workshop. So if you want to join us, please, you can join us now by just using the QR code that I'm sharing now on the video or checking the website. So thanks so much again, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.